Morgue. Winter. It's getting close to midnight. Pathologist John and I are sitting in our little room. We're drinking, eating, watching TV, and of course, chatting. The doorbell rings, meaning that a new corpse has arrived in our humble kingdom. I open the door. This time our client was a homeless boy of about 10 years old. He was frozen. Well, we received him with all the honors, put him on a gurney right next to the door, since there was no more room in the refrigerators, covered him with blankets, of which we had a bunch lying around there, from the corpses we'd brought in. The first thing that caught my eye was the wooden cross the boy was clutching in his hand. It was impossible to unclench his little hand, since it was already stiff, and even more so because it was frozen. So I left everything as it was and went on to John to continue the feast of body and soul. I told him about our new visitor and the cross. John said, "Look how the child clung to life, clutched the cross, asked God to keep him alive." After this phrase, we both fell into thought. John continued, "Well, I'm just like him. My whole childhood was spent on the streets and in orphanages. How I stayed alive, I myself don't understand. Let's drink to the orphans." I agreed with the proposal. We drank. Everything that happened next, we attributed to the bootleg vodka, but still did not fully understand, was it vodka? John went to look at this boy. He was gone for about 15 minutes, I went to look, honestly, I thought that he fell somewhere and was lying there, as always, but John was standing near the gurney, looking at it with a bewildered look and said to me, "Colin, I don't understand, where is the boy?" I looked at the gurney, there was no one on it. Only a wooden cross lying on it and a blanket. John and I had seen a lot, so this didn't scare us. Well, what could we do? We went to look for the fugitive in the morgue. The rats couldn't have stolen him. We went into the room where we actually dissect the corpses. We looked around. No one, except for 3 corpses on the tables. We were about to leave, when John shouted, "There he is! Under the table." I took a closer look and, indeed, a child was looking at John and me with his big eyes from under the marble table. "Are you alive or something? Kid, come here, we won't hurt you," John spoke to him. "Colin, come on, why are you silent?" A window opened in the room where we had been sitting until that moment, or rather, that was the sound. We went to see what was going on. Nothing. Everything was closed. Everything was in place. We went back, but the boy wasn't under the table. We ran to the gurney again. The cross is gone. "Hey, kid, I'm too old to play hide and seek, come here." John grumbled angrily. Then I felt something cold in my hand. I look around. This boy is standing there and holding my hand, all pale, blue, cold, well, a corpse for sure, it's impossible to mistake. Cadaveric spots have already appeared in the places where he was lying. I jumped back from him as if scalded, screaming. The boy disappeared again. We went outside to smoke and get some fresh air, since we really thought that we had drunk too much. We stand there smoking. We are already frozen. We go back, reluctantly of course, but what can we do? We go into our little room. On our table there is this wooden cross. We started to crawl everywhere, looking, in fact, for the owner of this cross. The doorbell rang again. I go up to it, open it. No one. I think, well, that's it, I need to quit drinking. As soon as I walked away, the doorbell rang again, I open it again no one. In general, this little rascal played with us like this about 5 times, until John and I sobered up completely and started whining out loud. We heard a sound in the room where the corpses were lying, as if all the instruments had flown from the table onto the floor. We flew in. And that's true. Everything was lying around. And there are 3 corpses missing. Well, with all our hardening, we got really scared. John took his heaviest cleaver and started shouting, "Get out right now, I'm not responsible for myself." While we were spinning around in one place, we heard children's laughter somewhere in the corner, where the cabinets with solutions and instruments were. We went to check. John, like in an action movie, swung the cabinet open. There was no one there except jars of formalin. Laughter was already heard from the other corner, where the desk stood. I quickly rushed there. I looked under it, no one. I turn around. The same boy is standing there, only now he is holding some kind of bundle in his arms. Like a child, and he is crying himself. I shouted to John, but at that very moment the boy disappeared again. All this is of course wonderful, but where are the 3 corpses? With these thoughts, we decided to go freeze outside rather than go crazy here. And so we did. We approached the front door, it is open, although we definitely closed it. Okay. Apparently the corpses left and forgot to close it. We went out, went to the gazebo opposite to sit. We sit and smoke. We see the light in the window of our room go out, the front door opens, and again this laughter. Well, then we decided not to wait for what would happen next, but simply rushed to the hospital, which was next to our morgue. We ran into the emergency room, woke up all the nurses. John shouted, "We have 3 corpses that have escaped, and you are sleeping here." Well, of course, the nurses twirled their fingers at their temples and told us to get out of here before they called the mental hospital. But where were we supposed to go? There was nothing left to do but go back. We hung around near the door to the morgue for a long time, until we froze, and finally decided to go in. It was pitch black in the entire morgue. John climbed into the switchboard, which, fortunately, was near the entrance, shined his phone and was horrified. All the wires were torn out with the flesh. And again that laughter, which was simply driving me crazy. We rushed to the street door, but it was no use. It was as if the door was being held from the other side. John and I fell on it, but this something from the other side was clearly stronger than us. So what should we do? There were some footsteps approaching us behind us and shrill children's laughter. And some passion was holding the door from the outside. Where should we run? John began to shine his phone into the darkness, crossing himself and cursing at the same time. I just stood there motionless, as if paralyzed. Suddenly it occurred to me that you could get to the street from the other side of the morgue, through the lab. I have a habit of always carrying all my keys in my pocket. That night it saved us. I pulled John by the hand to the lab door. Of course, it was hard to hit the keyhole in the dark, but when you really wanted to, it was possible. I opened the door and ran with John through the entire lab to the street. Some flasks and vials fell down there, they smashed everything. John cut his hand. We flew out into the street and ran wherever our eyes looked. We ran and ran. We stopped near the bus stop that we sat down on a bench and lit a cigarette. "What are you doing here? I don't get it." We heard a familiar voice. "Have you gotten drunk again?" It was our head of the department. It turned out to be 7 a.m. but we didn't even notice how the night had flown by. Without explaining anything, we trudged back to the morgue with the head of the department. We approached. Everything was open. We went in. There was a gurney at the entrance, a frozen boy was lying on it, a wooden cross was lying on the floor. The wires in the panel were still torn out and all the broken flasks in the lab were still there. After examining the scene, the head of the department began to express his opinion on the whole matter. No censor would let anything he told us pass. We went to the place where our 3 bodies had disappeared. The bodies were lying in place, but not in their proper places. The jars of formalin were lying broken on the floor, the stench was terrible. In our room there were 3 empty bottles of vodka and cucumbers with tomatoes. Of course, when the head of the department saw the bottles, the whole picture came together in his head. Having threatened us with dismissal and forced treatment in a drug addiction clinic, he went to his office. We were sitting on the couch in our room and just stupidly staring at the wall, realizing everything that had happened and what would happen when the lab technicians arrived. One boy's dad was a medical worker. He worked in an ordinary clinic as an ordinary surgeon. But one day, Dad, completely unexpectedly for himself, changed jobs. Dad had many friends and one friend helped Dad get a new job. So the boy's dad became the head of the morgue. A few days passed and due to Dad's fault, the electricity in the morgue broke. The repair workers were supposed to come only on Monday morning, and now it was Friday evening. It is clear that during this time all the corpses in the morgue will spoil. And Dad really did not want anyone from the management to find out about this. They could fire him and then he would have to return to the clinic and receive half the salary. So Dad made a deal with a truck driver. All the corpses were brought to the apartment where Dad, Mom, the boy, and the dog lived. Of course, you can't put the corpses in the refrigerator, but Dad had already thought of a trick in advance. It was winter now, -20 outside. Dad kicked the boy out of his room, opened the window wide, and that's how he got a big refrigerator. Of course, Dad had already thought about doing the same in the morgue, but the windows there were bricked up. The only way out was exactly that, to bring the corpses in big black bags to his home. When Mom saw the corpses, she almost fainted. The dog immediately howled and hid under the bed. The boy was offended at Dad for taking away his room, and sat sulking in the kitchen, not even looking at the corpses. That night, the boy couldn't sleep. He kept thinking that any moment one of the corpses would come to life, crawl out of the bag and attack him. The boy put a small hatchet next to the sofa on which he was lying. If he was attacked, he would defend himself. He didn't sleep all night, and only in the morning did sleep overcome him. The boy slept for only 2 hours until his dad's scream woke him up. Dad lost one body. He brought 7 bodies, and now there are only 6 in the boy's room. Both the body and the black bag it was in are missing. Mom and the boy joined the search for the missing body. They searched all over the apartment, in the entryway. They even went to the neighbors, and carefully asked them if they had seen anything strange that night and in the morning. But no one saw anything. Dad was very, very upset. If they found out that he had lost one body, they would definitely fire him. Then he got dressed and went somewhere. He was gone for about 4 hours. Finally, the doorbell rang. It was Dad returning, dragging a heavy black bag across the floor. Mom asked Dad where he had found the missing body. But Dad only remained silent in response, his head hanging sadly. Finally, the long-awaited Monday morning arrived. Dad got up early, at 6 o'clock, quickly loaded the bodies into the truck and drove off to work. The boy was finally able to return to his room. It was cold in there, but the air was quickly warming up. It soon became good, but somehow uncomfortable. Either there was some kind of smell, or dampness, but the boy felt very unpleasant. Even after several days this feeling remained, and then one day the boy dropped a roll of adhesive tape on the floor, which rolled under the bed. The boy reached for it and bumped into something unusual with his hand. Shining a flashlight, he saw a large black bag with a corpse under his bed. It turned out that the same corpse had simply rolled accidentally under the bed, where Dad had not noticed it. Dad then had to go outside to look for a new corpse. The problem was that the missing corpse belonged to a red-haired boy who died because he accidentally got tangled in a clothesline and suffocated. So Dad had to track down a similar red-haired boy and kill him by strangulation. Dad finally tracked down one when he went into the garage to pee, and strangled him with a rope. First he hid the body in the bushes, then drove up to the car, put the body in a bag, and the bag in the car. So the next night, Dad and son had to take shovels, take the first red-haired boy to the winter forest and bury him there. They dug the frozen ground for 3 hours. The boy no longer felt his frozen hands and feet. The whole way back, Dad raised his son, told him that it is very hard to be an adult, that any work requires diligence, responsibility, and a sense of duty, that in order to work well, you need to study for a long time and develop your will.